His hands wouldn't stop shaking as he gripped the boarding pass for the third time that afternoon. Jack Morrison stood in the Denver airport terminal, staring at the small piece of paper like it might hold the answers to questions he'd been asking himself for weeks. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed with that particular hum that airports have. That sound that reminds you that you're in a place designed for transition, for leaving, for saying goodbye. United Flight 847 to Los Angeles. 2 hours and 40 minutes. A distance that felt like crossing an ocean. His daughter Emma sat beside him on the metal airport chair, swinging her legs because they didn't quite touch the ground. She was 7 years old. 7 years of life experience, and somehow she understood the world better than most adults twice her age. She had learned early how to read people, how to understand what they needed even when they didn't know themselves. Emma had this way of looking at situations that made everything suddenly simple, like she could see right through all the complicated adult nonsense straight to what actually mattered. She was wearing her favorite pink sneakers, the ones with the sparkles. She had insisted on wearing them today, even though Jack had suggested her regular shoes might be more practical for travel. "You look scared, Daddy," she said. He was scared, absolutely terrified. Not just because of the flight. That was part of it, sure. He hadn't flown in 6 years. Not since his wife died in a car accident on a rain-soaked highway while he was 300 miles away working on someone else's building, building bridges for strangers while his own life was falling apart without him there to catch it. He had been in a meeting, discussing load-bearing capacities and structural integrity with people in suits while his wife was being rushed to a hospital where nobody could save her. Every single time he thought about being 35,000 feet in the air with nothing between him and the ground but metal and hope and prayers from people who weren't sure God was listening, his chest got tight. His breathing became shallow. His hands did exactly what they were doing right now. They shook. The shake was involuntary, biological. His nervous system was screaming at him to run, to protect himself, to protect his daughter. Flight or fight. And since he couldn't fight a plane, the only option was flight. But he was about to get on one. The irony wasn't lost on him. But that wasn't the biggest reason his hands were shaking today. The real reason sat in the envelope in his pocket. The medical letter from the hospital in California. The one that said Emma needed to see a specialist. Not a routine checkup. Not something that could wait until next month or next quarter or whenever they had saved enough money. Because they would never save enough money. That was the truth he'd learned 6 years ago. Money doesn't appear, it has to come from somewhere. And when you're a single father making $2,400 a month, the somewhere is yourself. Your time, your energy, your dreams. The doctors in Denver had looked confused when they ordered the tests. Emma seemed perfectly fine, completely fine. She was healthy. She was happy. She was his daughter and she was beautiful and whole. She ran and played and laughed and ate and slept like any other normal 7-year-old. But the results showed something they'd missed. Something small. Something that needed immediate attention from someone who specialized in cases like hers. Someone on the other side of the country. Someone Jack couldn't afford. Dr. Sarah Chen. That was the name the Denver doctors had mentioned. Like her name alone was supposed to solve everything. Like knowing she was the best was supposed to magically appear $3,000 in Jack's bank account. Jack looked down at his daughter. She was looking back at him with those eyes that somehow always knew when he was falling apart. The eyes of a 7-year-old who had learned to read her father's emotions the way other kids learned to read books. She had never had a choice. Her mother died when she was 14 months old, too young to remember Claire, too young to grieve in any conscious way. But Jack had grieved. Jack was still grieving. And Emma had learned to recognize the signs. The tightness in his jaw. The way he couldn't quite meet people's eyes. The way his shoulders rounded forward like he was trying to protect his heart from being broken again. "It's going to be okay," she said. How could she possibly know that? She reached over and took his hand. Her small hand in his big hand. Small and warm, and it fit inside his like it was made exactly for that space. Her fingers were small, thin. She had bitten her nails down to the quick. Another nervous habit she'd picked up from watching her father worry about things he couldn't control. How could she be so sure? 6 years! That's how long it had been since Jack Morrison had made any decision based on what he wanted. 6 years of choosing Emma over everything else. 6 years of turning down job promotions that would have meant travel time away from his daughter. Good promotions. Promotions that would have paid better. Promotions that would have required him to be in an office during the day instead of his small repair shop where Emma could come find him if she needed him. 6 years of working in his small repair shop on the south side of Denver, fixing agricultural equipment and construction tools, earning just enough to keep them going, barely. He worked with his hands now instead of his mind. His brilliant mind, his Ivy League education, his 2 patents for innovations in structural engineering that other people were probably using right now. Other people were probably profiting from. Other people were probably building things with designs that came from his brain. But that was okay. That was fine. Because Emma was safe. Emma was cared for. Emma knew that her father would always be there. He designed nothing anymore. He built nothing permanent. He just fixed what was broken and moved on to the next broken thing. A combine harvester with a cracked axle, an irrigation pump losing pressure, a tractor that wouldn't start in the morning. These were the puzzles he solved now. These were the problems he fixed. It was simple work, honest work. It paid $2,400 a month if he was lucky. If he picked up extra jobs, if he didn't have any unexpected expenses, which he always did. The car needed new tires last month. Emma had grown out of her shoes. The apartment had a leak that the landlord took 6 weeks to fix. Life had unexpected expenses. That was the lesson Jack had learned. It meant he could pick Emma up from school every day at 3 o'clock. It meant he could help her with homework at the kitchen table. It meant he could be there when she woke up from nightmares screaming her mother's name. It meant he could be there, and being there was worth more than anything. That's what he told himself on the nights when he was too exhausted to think straight, on the mornings when the work just kept coming and his back ached and his hands hurt from the cold and his mind drifted to what his life could have been. But being there wasn't always enough. Not when your daughter needed medical attention. Not when your 7-year-old needed to see a specialist who only practiced in California. Not when you had $1,800 in your savings account and the hospital was telling you the visit would cost at least $3,000. They lived in a small apartment on the south side of Denver. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, walls so thin that you could hear your neighbors arguing through them at 2 in the morning. Jack knew their arguments by heart. He knew when Tom was drinking because his voice would get louder. He knew when Sarah was crying because the television would go up very loud to cover the sound. He knew when they were fighting because everything would go quiet, and that silence was somehow worse than the yelling. Pipes that banged when someone upstairs took a shower. A heating system that rumbled like a dying animal. But it was theirs. Jack had made the best of it. There were pictures Emma had drawn taped to the refrigerator. Pictures of mountains and sunsets and the 2 of them holding hands. Some of them had 3 figures. Emma had been drawing Vivian, even though Emma had never met Vivian. Jack didn't know about those pictures yet. There was a bookshelf he'd built from reclaimed wood that he'd salvaged from a construction site. There were nightlights in every room because Emma still got scared at night, though she didn't like to admit it. She was 7. She was brave, but she was still just 7. Jack had $1,800 in his savings account. That was it. No emergency fund, no retirement plan, no college fund for Emma, no safety net, nothing to catch him if he fell. When the hospital told him he needed to get Emma to California to see Dr. Sarah Chen, who was apparently the best pediatric specialist in the country for her condition, Jack's first thought was, how? How was he supposed to do this? How was he supposed to fly across the country with his daughter? How was he supposed to pay for it? His second thought was, I have to figure it out, because that's what fathers do. They figure it out, even when it seems impossible. He'd picked up extra jobs the last 2 months. He'd advertised on Facebook. He'd called people he used to work with. He'd taken jobs that were beneath his skill level because they paid cash and paid fast. He'd fixed things for people he didn't usually work for. A neighbor's broken washing machine, a friend's truck that wouldn't turn over in the cold, a lawnmower that had been sitting in a garage for 2 years. He'd worked weekends and stayed up late into the night fixing broken things in his workshop while Emma slept in the apartment above the laundromat where her friend Rosa lived. He'd installed the coffee maker in his workshop specifically for those late nights. Times when the light would stay on past midnight and his hands would work while his mind wandered to places he didn't want it to go. He'd borrowed money from his mother, though it killed him to do it because his mother didn't have much either. His mother was a nurse, 58 years old, worked double shifts 3 days a week because the overtime pay was too good to turn down. She came home exhausted. Her feet hurt, her back hurt, her hands were chapped from washing them so many times during her shift, came home exhausted and still found time to help her son. She gave him $3,000 without asking questions. She just handed him the check and said, "You're a good father, Jack. Emma is lucky to have you." Mothers do that. They sacrifice without keeping score. The flight cost him $1,200. The rental car would be another $500. The hotel for 3 nights was $800. The specialist consultation was $2,500. The total was absolutely impossible. But here he was, standing in Denver airport, holding a boarding pass for a flight he was terrified to take, with his daughter who didn't understand why her daddy looked so scared, with his daughter who just wanted her father to be okay. "I'm not scared, Em," he said, even though they both knew it was a lie told with love, a lie that was meant to protect her. Emma looked at him with those eyes that could see right through everything. She reached over and took his hand again. "You don't have to be scared," she said. "I'm here, and if something bad happens, we'll figure it out together." 7 years old and wise beyond belief. That was Emma. That was his daughter. Jack squeezed her hand and tried to smile. The smile didn't quite reach his eyes, but he tried. "You're right," he said. "We'll figure it out together." They walked to the gate together. Emma pulled her small rolling suitcase behind her. She had insisted on packing it herself, which meant she'd brought 6 changes of clothes and 17 stuffed animals for a 3-night trip. She had her teddy bear, brown and worn, missing one button eye. He had that bear before Emma was born. Claire had bought it for him when they were dating. She'd said every man needed something to hold on to. He'd laughed at the time. He wasn't laughing anymore. She had her lamb, pink and fluffy, a gift from Jack's mother last Easter. She had the dog with the floppy ears that Jack's mother had given her for her 6th birthday. The dog that Emma called Floppy because that was the most creative name a 6-year-old could come up with. Jack didn't argue with her choices. She needed what she needed, control over something small in a situation that felt completely out of control. He understood that. He lived that every day. The gate agent called their section. Jack stood up and took a breath. A long breath. He counted to 4 while breathing in, held for 4 counts, exhaled for 4 counts. The therapist had taught him that. The therapist he'd been seeing for 2 years to help process Claire's death. To learn how to parent a daughter without a mother. To figure out how to be both the strong one and the one who was falling apart. And they walked toward the bridge that would take them to the plane. His heart was pounding. His palms were sweat-soaked. His breathing was doing that thing where it felt shallow and urgent at the same time. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him to turn around, to drive instead, to do anything except get on an airplane. His body remembered. His body knew what happened when you got on a plane. Your life could change. Your wife could die. Your daughter could grow up without her mother. But Emma squeezed his hand again, and he got on the airplane. The cabin was full, almost every seat taken. The smell of coffee and recycled air and someone's expensive perfume. Jack and Emma made their way down the aisle toward their seats in the middle section. They weren't in first class. Jack didn't exist in a world where first class was even a possibility. He'd used what little money he had saved to book their seats as early as he could so they could sit together. Togetherness mattered more than comfort. They were in economy, cramped and uncomfortable, surrounded by strangers who were also uncomfortable. The sound of babies crying in the distance. The sound of business people tapping on keyboards. The sound of normal people trying to get somewhere. Their seats were 24B and 24C. Jack had the window and Emma had the middle. He'd specifically requested that so she could see out. She was mesmerized by the idea of being above the clouds. She'd never flown before either. She'd heard stories from kids at school who had been on planes. Magical stories about being above the world. About seeing clouds from above instead of from below. He buckled her in carefully, making sure the belt was secure but not too tight. He showed her how to work the recline button, warned her not to use it too much because people behind her needed legroom. He pointed out how to open the window shade. He made sure she knew exactly where the bathroom was in relation to their seats. 3 rows back, on the left side. He made her trace the path with her eyes so she would remember. He made sure she knew that if she needed him, he would be right there, always. The flight attendant, a woman who looked like she'd smiled at 10,000 nervous passengers in her career, checked their seatbelts and moved on. She didn't see the fear in Jack's eyes. She didn't see his hands gripping the armrest like it was a lifeline. She just saw another parent traveling with a child. Jack sat down. The seat was narrow. He could feel the person next to him breathing, a man in a business suit who didn't even look up from his laptop. Typing something important, something that probably mattered to someone somewhere. Jack wondered what it was like to have work that mattered to other people. Work that would continue if he wasn't there. Jack closed his eyes and tried to calm his nervous system. Deep breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. That's what the meditation app his therapist had recommended told him to do. His therapist. Jack had started seeing a therapist 2 years ago, not because he wanted to, but because Emma deserved to have a father who was processing his grief. A father who wasn't just pushing it down and powering through. A father who was actually dealing with the fact that his wife was dead, that she wasn't coming back, that Emma would grow up without her mother. And that was Jack's job to help her through that. Emma squeezed his arm. Daddy, is this normal? The shaking, can other people see it? He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He pressed them against his thighs. It's normal, he said. I'm just nervous. It happens. I get nervous too, Emma said. But you taught me how to handle it. You told me that being scared is okay. You told me that brave people are just scared people who keep going anyway. When had he said that? He honestly couldn't remember. He said a lot of things to Emma over the years, little pieces of wisdom that he wasn't even sure he believed in himself. Things he'd read in parenting books. Things his own mother had told him. Things he'd picked up from his therapist in those weekly sessions where he sat in a comfortable chair and tried not to cry while talking about the worst day of his life. But she remembered. She filed everything away in that brilliant 7-year-old brain of hers. Everything he said and did, she was watching, absorbing, learning. That's right, he said. Brave people feel scared too. So you're brave, she said, and I'm brave. So we can do this. The plane pushed back from the gate. Jack felt his stomach drop, and they hadn't even taken off yet. The engines started to rumble, a deep, powerful sound that vibrated through the entire aircraft. The cabin lights dimmed slightly for no reason Jack could understand. The captain came on the intercom and said something about weather and expected flight time and appreciate your business. His voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who'd made this flight 1,000 times. Emma leaned over and looked out the window as they taxied toward the runway. Her face was pressed against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. The pure, uncomplicated wonder of a child who still believed the world was full of magic. "Daddy," she whispered. "We're really doing this. They were really doing this." The plane turned onto the runway. Jack could feel the wheels rolling over the tarmac. Each bump traveled up through his spine. The engines grew louder, more insistent. There was a moment of complete silence inside his mind, like his brain was just holding its breath, like the world was holding its breath. And then the plane accelerated. The force pushed him back into his seat. Emma grabbed his hand. Her grip was tight. The ground was moving faster and faster beneath them. Faster than any car could move. Faster than anything should move on the ground. The feeling of weightlessness came next. That strange sensation of leaving the earth behind. That moment when you stop feeling the solid ground beneath you and start feeling only air. Jack's stomach lurched. His hands started shaking worse, much worse. He thought about Claire. He thought about that day 6 years ago. The phone call, the hospital, the moment they told him she was gone. She'd been hit by a truck. The driver had crossed the median in the rain. In the middle of the night, on a highway where people drove too fast and trusted too much in their own reflexes. No, don't think about that. Don't think about death. Don't think about loss. But Emma was looking out the window, watching Denver disappear beneath them, and she was smiling. The smile was enough to pull him back. "They're really getting smaller," she said. "Look, Daddy, we're above the clouds now. We're actually above the clouds." He looked. She was right. They had broken through into blue sky. Denver was beneath them, small and distant. Houses were dots. Roads were lines. The whole world that seemed so big and important down there was suddenly tiny from up here. The view was supposed to be beautiful, but Jack was too afraid to appreciate it. Emma leaned against him, her head fit perfectly against his shoulder, her small body fitting against his like they were made to fit together. "We did it," she said. "We're flying." "Yeah," he said. His voice was quieter than he meant it to be. "We're flying." 30 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant named Robert brought them drinks and snacks. Emma got apple juice and pretzels. Jack got coffee that was slightly too hot and cookies he didn't really want. The coffee tasted bitter. The cookies tasted like nothing. Robert was a man who looked like he was in his 50s. He had grey hair and kind eyes and the kind of smile that came from having helped a lot of people. He had worked this airline for probably 25 years. He had probably seen thousands of nervous fathers flying with daughters. He had probably seen things that would break most people's hearts. He smiled at Emma in a genuine way. The way people do when they see a kid who's genuinely happy about being alive. "Your daughter's a brave one," he said to Jack. "Most kids are terrified on their first flight." "She's braver than I am," Jack said. Robert laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. Jack was serious. Emma was definitely braver than him. She always had been. Even as a baby, she'd been fearless. She'd reached for things. She'd laughed at strangers. She'd trusted the world in a way Jack couldn't anymore. Even as a toddler, she'd run toward things instead of away from them. Even now, at 7 years old, she approached the world with a confidence that Jack envied. Jack tried to relax after that. He leaned back in the seat and closed his eyes. He tried to think about the meeting with Dr. Chen. He tried to think about what the diagnosis might mean. He tried to think about anything except the fact that he was sitting in a metal tube 35,000 feet above the earth, held up only by physics and faith and the competence of pilots he'd never met. Emma watched the clouds drift past and occasionally pointed out shapes she thought she recognized. "That one looks like a dinosaur," she said. "That one looks like an ice cream cone. That one looks like the sad face she makes when I won't let her have dessert." Jack opened his eyes and looked at the cloud she was pointing at. It did look like a sad face. He managed to smile at that. The flight seemed to be going smoothly. Jack's heart rate was slowing down. His hands had stopped shaking. His breathing was becoming more normal, more regular. He was actually starting to think that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. That flying wasn't as terrible as he'd built it up to be in his head. That maybe he could survive this. That maybe Emma could survive this. That maybe they'd get to California and Emma would see the doctor and everything would be okay. He should have known better. He'd learned 6 years ago that things could change in an instant. That the world could shift beneath your feet. That everything you thought was solid could suddenly crack and crumble. At 35,000 feet, somewhere over the desert between Arizona and California, something changed in the air. Jack felt it first as a slight vibration, a tremor that ran through the entire aircraft. Then the plane dipped. Just a little. Just enough to feel like the bottom had fallen out of everything. Emma gripped his arm. "Daddy?" "It's okay," he said. Even as his body flooded with adrenaline, even as every alarm in his nervous system started going off. Then it got worse. The plane didn't just dip, it lurched. The lights flickered. Someone behind them made a sound that was half gasp, half scream. A woman 3 rows up dropped a cup and it clattered down the aisle. The seatbelt sign, which had been off, suddenly illuminated with a sharp ding, a ding that felt like an alarm, like a warning. "This is the flight crew," the captain said, and his voice was calm in a way that somehow made everything worse. "We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence due to a storm system in the area." Unexpected, like the captain hadn't seen it coming, like maybe nobody had seen it coming. "Please return to your seats and keep your seat belts fastened." Turbulence, just turbulence, probably nothing, probably. But then the plane dropped again. This time it was harder, much harder. This time Emma cried out. This time at least half the people on the plane made sounds. Sounds of fear, sounds of prayer, sounds of humans realizing they weren't in control. A flight attendant who had been walking down the aisle nearly fell. She grabbed onto a seat to steady herself. Someone's overhead bin popped open and luggage started falling. A rolling suitcase tumbled down the aisle. Someone's laptop, someone's coat. All the material things people had brought onto the plane suddenly didn't matter. All that mattered was survival. Jack pulled Emma against his chest. His hands came up and held her firmly but not tight. He could feel her heart pounding against his chest. Or maybe it was his own heart. Maybe their hearts were pounding in sync. His mind was racing through disaster scenarios. The engine could fail. They could lose power. They could hit something in the sky that he didn't even know could be hit. The plane could just fall. Gravity always wins eventually. That's what he'd learned sitting in a parking garage 6 years ago. Waiting for hospital doctors to tell him his wife wasn't coming home. Waiting for them to tell him that she was gone. That Emma would grow up without her mother. That he would have to figure out how to be a mother and a father both. Emma was crying. Small, frightened sounds. The plane bucked like a living thing trying to throw them off. Like a bull in a rodeo trying to throw its rider. Jack pressed his forehead against her hair and did the only thing he could think to do. He started breathing, slowly, deliberately, the way his therapist had taught him. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Out through the mouth for 4 counts. In and 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold in 1, 2, 3, 4. Out in 1, 2, 3, 4. After a moment, Emma's breathing began to match his. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "Just listen to my voice. Feel how I'm breathing. You're going to breathe with me. Can you do that?" She nodded against his chest. "In and 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold in 1, 2, 3, 4. Out in 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. You're doing great. You're so brave. I'm right here. I'm not leaving. I will never leave you." The turbulence continued. The plane shook and swayed. People around them were gripping armrests and praying to gods they hadn't thought about in years. People were crying. People were holding on to their children. But Emma was breathing with her father. She was synchronizing her fear with his calm. She was learning that being scared doesn't have to be alone. That there's power in breathing together. That there's strength in someone staying present with you when everything feels like it's falling apart. The pilot's voice came back on. Steady and professional. "Folks, we're going to move through this active weather cell. We're completely safe. We've encountered turbulence like this 1,000 times. I'm going to climb us to a different altitude, and we should break through shortly. Your safety is our #1 priority. We'll have you in Los Angeles on schedule." Jack didn't know if it was true. He didn't know if they were safe. He didn't know if the captain was just trained to sound calm when the world was falling apart. He'd learned that lesson too. People can sound calm while terrible things are happening. People can say everything is fine while their world is crumbling. What he did know was that Emma needed him to believe it, so he chose to believe it. "You hear that?" he said softly. "The captain says we're safe. And I believe him." "I believe him too," Emma whispered. The turbulence lasted maybe 10 more minutes, though it felt like an hour, an eternity. 1,000 hours compressed into 10 minutes. Then, gradually it started to ease. The plane stopped shaking so violently. The drops became smaller. The lurches less dramatic. The moment came when he realized that maybe, actually, they were going to be okay. That maybe the plane wasn't going to fall out of the sky. That maybe he wasn't going to lose Emma. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, a soft ding echoed through the cabin. A ding that sounded like relief, like redemption. Almost immediately, people started standing up. People who had been gripping their seats like their lives depended on it started breathing normally again. Nervous conversations started. Someone laughed nervously. Someone somewhere was crying. But the crisis had passed. Jack held Emma for a few more minutes after everything calmed down. He just held her and didn't let go. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, which she was. She was everything. "I knew you wouldn't let anything bad happen," Emma said. Her voice was small but steady. "I would never let anything bad happen to you," he said. Never. And he meant it with everything he had. First class was separated from the rest of the cabin by a subtle divider. Nothing dramatic, just a physical acknowledgement that some people paid more to be treated better. Jack had noticed the area when they boarded. He'd noticed that the seats were bigger, that the flight attendants smiled more, that the people sitting there all looked like they had never worried about money in their lives. There was a woman sitting in seat 1A. Jack had glimpsed her when they walked past during boarding. She had been wearing a blazer that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe. Navy blue, perfectly tailored. The kind of blazer that said, "I have money and power and I know exactly who I am." Her hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Her makeup was perfect. She had been working on a laptop, completely focused, like she was literally the only person on the plane. Like everyone else was just background, like they were extras in her story, not characters with their own narrative. During the turbulence, Jack had seen her reflection in the overhead compartment. She wasn't gripping her seat like everyone else was. She was sitting perfectly still, her hand on the armrest, her face completely composed, except for the tiny detail of her jaw clenched so tight that Jack could see the muscles working. She had been terrified, just like everyone else, absolutely terrified, but she had sat alone with that terror. She had faced the chaos without letting anyone see it, while Emma had Jack, and while a couple across the aisle had held on to each other, and while a mother 2 rows back had a child she could comfort. The woman in 1A had faced the chaos with nobody. That was the thing nobody talked about. Being rich, being powerful, being important. It didn't mean you didn't feel scared. It didn't mean you didn't feel alone. In fact, maybe it meant you felt more alone, because there was nobody you could let your guard down with. Nobody you could admit weakness to. Nobody who was allowed to see that you were afraid. After the turbulence passed and things had settled, Jack didn't think about the woman in 1A anymore. He was focused on Emma, on making sure she was okay, on the distraction of landing in Los Angeles and getting to the hospital and facing whatever came next. He was thinking about what the doctor would say. He was thinking about what the test results would show. He was thinking about everything except the woman sitting in first class. He didn't know that Vivian Ashford, CEO and founder of Ashford Capital, one of the most successful investment firms on the East Coast, was thinking about him. He didn't know that she had watched him comfort his daughter with absolute presence, that she had seen the way he prioritized her fear over his own, that something about the sight of a man who had nothing material holding onto a child like she was his entire world had broken something open in Vivian that she didn't even know was closed. He didn't know that she would not be able to stop thinking about him. He didn't know any of that. But she was already watching, already noting the way he breathed, the way he didn't panic, the way he chose to be calm for someone else, already wondering who he was, already knowing that she couldn't stop until she found out. She watched him hold his daughter. She watched him whisper something in her ear. She watched the little girl's face transform from fear to trust. And Vivian Ashford felt something crack inside her chest, something she didn't know how to put back together, something that would require her to give up everything she'd built. They landed at LAX without incident. The captain brought them down smoothly and the wheels touched the runway and everyone applauded like they had all survived something monumental. Which maybe they had. Jack stood up and got their carry-ons from the overhead bin. His hands were still shaking slightly, but he was standing. He was breathing. He was alive. Emma was already standing, bouncing on her toes, full of energy now that the flight was over. The fear had transformed into excitement. "We did it, Daddy! We actually did it! Yes, we did, sweetheart. Yes, we did." They made their way through the cabin toward the exit. Jack could see the bridge leading out of the plane. He could see the Los Angeles airport beyond. He could see the future. And it looked like maybe they were going to be okay. Jack's mother was waiting for them at baggage claim. Margaret Morrison was a woman who had raised a son alone after her husband left, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for his college, who had watched him get married and then watched him become a widower 6 years ago. She had grey hair that she dyed, but not often enough. It was starting to show some silver underneath the brown, lines around her eyes from smiling at patients who needed it, and hands that knew how to hold people when they were falling apart. She was holding a sign with Emma's name on it, even though she was Emma's grandmother, even though Emma knew exactly who she was. Margaret had written the name in big letters with markers, with hearts and stars around it, because that's what Margaret did. She made things special, even small things, even a sign at the airport. She swept Emma into a hug and kissed the top of her head about 10 times. "There's my beautiful girl. I can't believe you flew. You were so brave. You were so brave." Emma hugged her grandmother back. Tight. "We sat in the sky, Grandma. We were actually in the sky. I know, baby. I know." Then Margaret turned to Jack and pulled him into her arms and held him in a way that said she knew this was hard, that she knew he was scared, that she was proud of him anyway. "My strong boy," she said. "You did good." "Your apartment is all set," she said, pulling back. "It's small, but it's clean. And I made that casserole you like, the one with the cream of mushroom soup and the fried onions. It's in the fridge." "Thank you, Mom," he said. "We go to the hospital tomorrow at 9. Dr. Chen will see Emma at 9:30. Jack felt his stomach tighten. Tomorrow. One more night until they knew for sure. "The good news is that the doctor said this is very manageable," Margaret continued. "Once we know exactly what we're dealing with, there are treatments, there are options." Jack nodded. He had told himself not to get his hopes up too much. But hope is not something you can control. Hope sneaks in when you're not looking. Hope says, maybe this will be okay. Maybe your daughter will be fine. Maybe you made the right choice by getting on that plane. Maybe everything you sacrificed will matter. Let's get to the car, Margaret said. It's been a long day. She had rented a small SUV. It was clean and new, and there was a booster seat already installed for Emma. Margaret had thought of everything. That's what mothers do. As they drove through Los Angeles, heading toward the apartment Margaret had rented, Jack thought about the flight. He thought about the turbulence. He thought about Emma breathing with him, synchronizing her fear with his calm. He thought about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just stay present with someone you love while everything around you is falling apart. He thought about how that was the only thing that had ever mattered. He didn't think about the woman in 1A. He had no idea that she was at that very moment on her phone, talking to someone, talking to her assistant. He had no idea that she was saying words that would change everything. Find out who that man was, the one in economy, the one with the little girl. I need to know his name. The assistant was used to demands like this, used to Vivian calling with requests that seemed unreasonable, but that Vivian always expected to be fulfilled. I'll do what I can, the assistant said, but there's no passenger manifest available to me. Then find another way, Vivian said. Check security footage from the airport. Check boarding records. Check with the flight crew. I don't care how you do it, but I need his name, and I need to know where he's from. A week later, Jack's entire life shifted. The diagnosis was better than expected. Emma had a condition that was manageable. It would require treatment and monitoring and follow-up visits to California. But it wasn't life-threatening. It wasn't something that would limit her life. It was something that could be handled. Something that would make her life better. Jack felt a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying finally lift off his shoulders. Dr. Chen had looked at him when she was explaining the diagnosis. She had looked at him with kindness in her eyes. You made the right choice getting on that plane, she had said. A lot of parents would have waited, would have delayed, but you came immediately. That matters. So yes, she'll be fine. Better than fine. She'll be great. The return flight from Los Angeles to Denver was smooth. No turbulence, no fear. Emma slept against his shoulder for most of it. Jack sat there in the quiet, holding his sleeping daughter, thinking about how luck works sometimes. How sometimes the thing you're terrified of turns out to be survivable. How sometimes your worst fear isn't as bad as you thought it would be. They landed at Denver International. Jack collected their bags. He rented a car and drove them home. Emma fell asleep again in the car, worn out from the travel and the emotion and the simple exhaustion of being 7. Jack carried her from the car to the apartment. He carried her upstairs, her head on his shoulder. He tucked her into her bed, still in her clothes, and sat on the edge of the mattress for a while, just watching her sleep, watching her face relax, watching her breathe. She was okay. She was going to be okay. He had made the right decision. He pressed a kiss to her forehead and left the room quietly. Then he went back to his workshop the next morning like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The workshop was a small building behind a vacant lot on the south side of Denver. Jack owned the land and the building. It was one of the few things he had managed to keep from his old life. A space that was entirely his, where he could work with his hands and not think about anything else. He had a John Deere combine that needed the crankshaft replaced. He had an irrigation pump that was losing pressure. He had a backlog of work that would keep him busy for the next month. He pulled up around 8 in the morning, unlocked the roll-up door, and started the coffee maker he kept in the corner. The morning was normal, cool, clear, the kind of Denver morning that made you grateful to be alive. Jack was under the combine working on the crankshaft when he heard the workshop door open. He didn't think much of it. Customers sometimes came by without calling. People who needed emergency repairs, people who knew where to find him. He rolled out from under the combine and stood up, wiping his hands on his work jeans. What he saw made him stop moving completely. A woman was standing in his workshop. She was wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt, sunglasses pushed up on top of her head. She looked completely different from the woman he vaguely remembered from the first-class section of the airplane. But it was undeniably her. Her eyes were different in person, harder, like she had spent years learning how to look at the world without letting it touch her. I need to talk to you, she said. Her voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it, something fragile. Jack blinked. He looked at his hands. They were covered in grease. Can I help you with something? A repair. I did some research on you, the woman said. I know who you are. I know that you were a structural engineer. I know that you designed buildings and bridges. I know that you have patents and that you walked away from a very successful career. I know that 6 years ago your wife died and you decided to raise your daughter alone and you've been fixing equipment ever since. Jack's chest tightened. No one talked about that. No one brought up Claire's death unprompted like that. It felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. Who are you? He asked. His voice was steady, but his hands had started shaking again. My name is Vivian Ashford. I was on your flight from Denver to Los Angeles. I was sitting in first class. You comforted your daughter during the turbulence. You helped her breathe. You helped her feel safe. And I've spent the last week thinking about it. Vivian Ashford. The name meant nothing to Jack. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. But the way she said it with a kind of resignation suggested that other people would know that name. Other people would recognize it as important. Okay, he said carefully. He said, I own a company, Vivian said. I spend most of my time making money and acquiring assets and climbing in a world where the only thing that matters is winning. And I was sitting in that airplane, completely alone, completely terrified, and I watched a man with nothing hold on to his daughter like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. And I realized that I had made a mistake. What kind of mistake? I traded real life for a successful one, Vivian said. I thought they were the same thing, but they're not. Jack understood then. On some level, he couldn't quite articulate that this woman had been broken open by what she saw on that airplane, that something in her had recognized something in him, that she was standing in his workshop because she needed to understand how he did it, how he prioritized love over ambition, how he made that choice over and over and made it look like it wasn't even a choice at all. That's not for me to judge, Jack said. I'm not asking you to judge, Vivian said. I'm asking you to explain. Explain what? How to live like it matters. How to choose something other than winning. How to be content with enough. Jack set down his tools. He looked at this powerful, polished, completely out-of-place woman standing in his workshop, and he understood that she was asking him something real, something that she couldn't get from her normal life. I don't think it's something I can explain, he said. I think it's something you have to experience. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. Can I come back, she asked. Back here? Yes. I want to understand. I want to know what this looks like. You'll probably be bored, Jack said. Probably, Vivian agreed, but I need to try. Okay then, Jack said. Come back tomorrow. Bring work clothes. I'll show you what I do. That was how it started. That was the moment that would change everything for all three of them. Vivian came back the next day. She arrived at 7:30 in the morning. Before Jack had even arrived, she was sitting outside the workshop in an expensive car. A Tesla, black, probably $100,000, wearing work clothes that looked like they'd never been worn before. Everything still had the creases from the store. Jack's heart did something strange when he saw her, something he hadn't felt since Claire died. Good morning, he said. I wasn't sure you'd actually come back, Vivian said. I wasn't sure you'd actually come back, Jack said. They both smiled a little. And the day began. She watched him work. She asked questions. She learned about hydraulic systems and engine blocks and the satisfaction of fixing something broken. At first, there was distance between them, politeness, the kind of careful conversation between strangers. But gradually, over the course of a week, something shifted. Vivian started talking about her father, who had left when she was young, about her mother, who had worked constantly to build the family business, about the moment she realized that she was the same as her mother, that she had become so focused on success that she had forgotten about living. Jack listened. He understood the feeling of giving up on parts of yourself. He understood the weight of responsibility. He understood the loneliness of being the person that other people depended on. One afternoon, when the sun was starting to fade and the workshop was getting quieter, Vivian asked him something. Why did you stop? Stop what? Being an engineer. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, at the permanent stains from years of work. Claire was pregnant, he said finally, and she was scared. Not about the baby, about whether I would stay present for our family or whether I would disappear into my work the way so many fathers do. And I promised her that I wouldn't, that I would choose her and our child over everything else. And then she died. Vivian didn't say anything. She didn't look away. She just listened. And I realized, Jack continued, that the promise was more important than it had been when she was alive. Because now there was just Emma, and she needed me to keep that promise. She needed me to show her what it looks like when someone chooses love over ambition, every single day. Vivian was quiet for a long time. So you gave up everything? I didn't give up anything, Jack said. I chose what mattered. Emma met Vivian on the second Friday. Jack had mentioned that his daughter existed, but Vivian didn't fully grasp that Emma was real until she was standing in his apartment and a small girl came running out of the bedroom, bouncing off the walls with 7-year-old energy. This is my best client, Jack said. Emma, this is Vivian. Emma looked at Vivian with the kind of assessment that only a child can do, the kind of look that sees through everything you're trying to project and evaluates what's really there. You look sad, Emma said. Vivian blinked. She's very direct, Vivian said. I'm 7, Emma said. I don't know how to not be direct. That's a good quality, Vivian said. Emma came and sat next to Vivian on the couch. Why are you sad? Emma asked. Because I made choices that seemed important at the time but turned out to be empty. You could make different choices now, Emma said. It's not that simple, Vivian said. It's actually pretty simple, Emma said. You just stop doing the thing that makes you sad and you start doing the thing that makes you happy. Out of the mouths of babes, Jack said. Vivian looked at Emma, really looked at her. And for the first time in years, Vivian Ashford, who had learned to control everything, who had learned to never show weakness, who had built walls so high that nobody could touch her, started to cry. Emma, without any hesitation, reached over and took her hand. "It gets better," Emma said. "That's what Daddy says. When things are scary or sad, he says it gets better. And he's right. It always gets better." Vivian held Emma's hand and something inside her broke open in a way she couldn't explain, in a way she didn't want to fix. 2 weeks after Vivian first walked into his workshop, Jack knew he was falling in love with her. It wasn't a thunderbolt. It was slower than that. It was watching her learn to relax, watching the tension in her shoulders ease, watching her smile, and realizing that she had probably never really smiled before, not the genuine kind where it reached her eyes. It was Emma teaching her how to draw. Vivian sitting at the kitchen table, pen in hand, creating something that had no function except that it was beautiful. Something that couldn't be monetized or optimized or improved. Something that just was. It was sitting on the balcony at night, after Emma had gone to bed, and talking about the kind of things that people only talk about when they're willing to be vulnerable. "My wife used to say that the most important thing was to be present," Jack said one night. "No matter what was happening, no matter what we were facing, what mattered was showing up for it, not running away from it, not trying to control it, just being there." "I never learned that," Vivian said. "It's not too late," Jack said. Vivian turned to look at him. In the darkness, with just the city lights below them, her face was soft, unguarded, in a way he'd never seen it before. "I'm scared that if I give this up, if I give up the company and the success and all of it, I'll lose myself," she said. "You won't lose yourself," Jack said. "You'll find yourself." And then he kissed her. It was the kind of kiss that changes things. The kind of kiss that makes you understand that you've been living your life in black and white and suddenly someone turned on the color. When they pulled apart, Vivian was crying again. But this time it was different. This time it was the kind of crying that comes from release, from finally letting something go. "I have to go back to New York for a little while," Vivian said. "I have to settle some things. But I'm coming back, promise?" Jack asked. "I promise," Vivian said. And Jack believed her. Because he had learned something on that airplane. That when you're present with someone, when you breathe with them through the turbulence, when you choose to stay, that matters. That changes things. Vivian was gone for 37 days. Jack counted them. He marked each one off on a calendar he kept in his workshop. He didn't tell Emma how much he was counting. But Emma knew. Emma always knew. "Is Vivian coming back?" Emma asked on day 30. "I hope so, baby," Jack said. "She promised," Emma said, "and Vivian keeps her promises." Jack wasn't sure that was true. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. He just knew that something in him had broken open, and Vivian had been standing there when it happened. On day 38, his phone rang. "I'm at the airport," Vivian said. "I'm in a car heading to your place. I'm bringing my whole life with me in 6 suitcases because I sold the apartment in New York and I quit the company and I figured out that none of it was worth it." Jack couldn't speak for a moment. "Did you hear me?" Vivian asked. "I heard you," Jack said. "And?" "And I love you," Jack said. "I don't know how it's possible to love someone this much in this short amount of time, but I do." "I love you too," Vivian said. "I love you and I love Emma and I love your stupid little apartment and I love your workshop and I love this life that seems impossible but is the most real thing I've ever felt." She got to his apartment 20 minutes later. Emma heard the knock before Jack could answer it. Emma ran to the door and opened it. Vivian was standing there with tears on her face. "You came back," Emma said. "I came back," Vivian said. "Are you staying?" "I'm staying," Vivian said. "Good," Emma said, "because I made you something. Come look." Emma pulled Vivian by the hand into the apartment. On the wall, taped with care, was a drawing. It was the 3 of them, Jack and Emma and Vivian, standing together, holding hands. "I made it every day while you were gone," Emma said, "and I knew you would come back because in the picture, you were always here." Vivian scooped Emma up and held her. And Jack understood, watching that moment, that his life had fundamentally changed. That he had been living for 6 years in a kind of black and white world, and suddenly someone had turned on the color, and there was no going back to grayscale. They stood in that small apartment, the 3 of them. And Jack thought about how we never really know what's coming, how we can't predict the moments that will change everything, how sometimes the thing you're most afraid of is actually the thing that saves you. The next day, Vivian, Jack, and Emma went to look at houses. It wasn't a big house. It was a 3-bedroom on the south side of Denver. But it had a kitchen where the 3 of them could cook together. It had a workshop out back where Jack could work. It had a room for Emma with windows that faced the mountains. It had space for a life. By evening, they owned it. Vivian had the money. Jack had the home equity from his previous life. Together they had enough. And more than that, they had a reason to do it. That night, they slept together in their new house. Emma in the room that would be her room. Vivian and Jack in the master bedroom, holding each other like they had been waiting their whole lives for this moment. Jack woke up before dawn and went to the kitchen and made coffee. He stood at the window and looked out at the mountains. He thought about Claire. He thought about how she would have liked Vivian, how she would have wanted Emma to have a woman in her life who loved her, how she would have wanted Jack to be happy. He thought about the flight, about the moment he realized he could save his daughter by just being present, by breathing with her, by showing her that being scared doesn't mean you're alone. He thought about how that moment on the airplane had created a ripple that changed everything. Vivian came into the kitchen. She was wearing an old sweatshirt of his that was too big for her. She looked different in it, younger, more real. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking," Jack said. About how sometimes the most important moments aren't the ones we expect. They're not the career achievements or the business deals or any of that. They're the small moments, the moments where we choose to be present for someone we love. Those are the moments that matter. Vivian wrapped her arms around him from behind. "I'm so glad you were on that flight," she said. "I'm so glad you were on that flight," Jack said. They stood there at the window, watching the sun come up over Denver. And Jack understood that he had found something most people spend their whole lives looking for. He had found someone who loved him for who he actually was, not who he pretended to be. He had found someone who understood that real wealth isn't measured in money or power or status. Real wealth is having someone to hold on to when the turbulence comes. Real wealth is being able to breathe with someone and know that they're breathing with you. Real wealth is standing in a kitchen before dawn, holding the woman you love, knowing that your daughter is safe and loved and sleeping in the next room. That was the richest he had ever felt. That was all he had ever needed. And finally, after so many years of struggling alone, he had it. The coffee brewed. The mountains turned gold in the rising sun. And in that moment, Jack Morrison understood that sometimes the greatest things in life come not from what we've built or achieved, but from who we've become in the process of choosing love over everything else. Emma came padding out of her room in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Can we make pancakes?" she asked. "For Vivian?" "Yes, baby," Jack said. "We can make pancakes. For Vivian, for all of us, for our family." And that's exactly what they did.